All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you again for those of you who are joining us now, or those of you who are joining us in the future on YouTube. It's great to have you here. This was going to be our last workshop of the semester, but since we had to postpone a few earlier in the semester, we will be having a couple of makeup dates. So stay tuned to our social media to find out the names of those workshops and the dates, and also the updated Zoom information. But today we're extremely excited to have this workshop. I think it's one that almost every grad student and postdoc and even professors I talk to, they say, I wish I had had a workshop like this when I was an undergraduate, because there's a lot of really important information that you can get that can make the transition smoother to graduate school or whatever path you take. So we're extremely excited to be offering this. I'm going to go ahead and have our wonderful partner with the postdocs, Keegan Curry with the Merit Scholars, a wonderful program that helps lead these workshops with our office. And once again, you can see my name there. I didn't say my name. I'm Gareth Jones, the Assistant Director in the Office of Service Learning and Undergraduate Research. And we team up with the Merit Scholars to offer these wonderful workshops every semester. And this semester we're doing one on developing research skills. And those, that connection to graduate school is huge, and I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about that. So I'm going to go ahead and let Keegan Curry introduce himself and our wonderful presenter today.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gareth. We're really excited to bring you this topic. My name's Keegan Curry. I'm a first-year PhD student here. My email is kcc@uab.edu. Real easy. If you have any questions, shoot them my way, and I will figure it out for you. We're going to have the wonderful Dr. Buchanan, a postdoc merit scholar here at UAB. Take it away. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Keegan. So today I'm going to be talking with you all about preparing for graduate school. I do want to preface this with everyone's journey is different, everyone's journey is unique, and so that it's never too late to prepare for graduate school. So keeping that in mind with some of the stuff I'm going to be going over today. So to give you an overview of what I'm going to be discussing, so I'll give a little bit of my background, where I came from. We'll talk about how to find graduate programs that interest you, talking about the application process with graduate school, so kind of touching on some of those key points to keep in mind, as well as considerations for having a good interview. Also, how to network while navigating the admissions process. And lastly, we'll touch on questions to make sure you ask current students as well as primary investigators at the institution that you're interested in preparing to apply for. So a little bit of background about myself. I did my undergrad at Auburn University in the School of Kinesiology, studying physical activity and health. And then I prepared for graduate school by attending to get my master's of education in exercise science. And then from mentors, my current informal and formal mentors at Auburn helped me into my preparation process to go study at the University of Florida, where I completed my PhD in biobehavioral science in the Department of Applied Physiology and Kinesiology. So I'll kind of sprinkle in little facts about my journey while touching on the main focus of today to kind of give you some context and again emphasize that point that everyone's journey is a little different, but other things to consider to kind of do what's best for you. So first, how to find graduate programs that interest you. So what are some things to consider when you're looking for it? So first, identifying, so doing a lot of self-inventory, identifying your passions and motivations, then underlining what your career goals are, researching types of degree programs once you set out what is motivating you, what is putting in that ambition for you to reach your career goals. And then from there, being able to identify the types of degree programs that correlate with those passions and motivations. Once you have that degree program in mind, you'll also want to reach out to your network around you. So family, friends, faculty that you already know that you're in contact with, and just talk to them about these things, having informal conversations as well as just meetings, especially with the current faculty members you may be interested in talking to, because even if they don't have anything at their institution currently, they may know someone within their network that they could direct you to. And then also, once you kind of get an idea of potential places from those networks, as well as your own interests, identifying institutions that meet those interests and labs within those institutions. Lastly, doing an assessment of overall, is this going to fit your lifestyle? So we'll talk about considering your personal values when it comes to a work-life balance. How does that look? So that's something that's okay to consider when at this point. You should always be considering it, but it is okay to consider those things. And then lastly, talking about budgeting for that. We'll talk about some strategies as far as getting funding while you're in graduate school as well. So first being identifying your passions and motivations. So one of the things that I did was I made a checklist of pros and cons for, first of all, the subjects I was taking, what interests me. I was currently I really enjoyed my courses that were within exercise science. And so I took note of those. I also took note of, I was also working at campus recreation, and I thought to myself, well, I really like just fitness in general, being healthy in general. And so that was something that motivated me. And essentially being able to turn that into my career thing, my passions and motivations. So first off, you can start off with, again, identifying courses that you're taking that interest you the most. And then again, making that pro and con list, and then searching for potential career options within that field of study. If once you start looking into graduate degrees, what are the next steps? Can you go towards a master's? Do you need to go up to a doctorate to do what you want to do? So that's one of the ways you can kind of take this into consideration, but that's something you should always keep in mind ultimately to keep you motivated, because one of the key things of getting through graduate school is that perseverance, just persevering, sticking with it. And you want to make sure it's something that you enjoy doing if you're going to spend that much, invest that much time and effort into your education. So after you make that pro-con list of your interests, as far as like what interests you want maybe outside of school, but also academically, then being able to underline your career goals. Where do you ultimately want to go? And knowing that potentially may change along your trajectory into graduate school as well, as that's okay too. So I've included also some sources as we're going over these points, but a great source that they direct you to, that I've been directed to in graduate school, that I think would be good for you all to kind of go ahead and look at, is the myidp.sciencecareers.org. Now there's other career goal assessments that you can do outside of a scientific career. Just because you're going to graduate school doesn't mean you have to be on the scientific career track. But what I like about this site is it allows you to assess your skills, your interests and values at the professional, personal, and academic level. And then it'll suggest, based off of those assessments, it'll suggest some scientific career paths that might fit more what your interests are at that time when you're taking that assessment. And then it gives you a way to set goals. So set some SMART goals for you to attain that overarching career goal that you've inputted into the system. And then the other part of this website that I really like is it provides some specific resources for those career paths and career choices. On the right here, I have a picture of what I ended up actually doing before I was directed to this site once I got to graduate school. Was based off of my motivations and my career interests. I made in the center bubble here of this little web map is I put, okay, well, I am interested in exercise and health. And so I put that in this center circle here. And then I was like, okay, well, what career options are there that branch off of that? And of course, there's personal trainer, group fitness coordinator, and then when I was looking into graduate school, ultimately being able to teach classes, you can teaching courses at the master's level, so becoming a faculty member at with a master's degree, or moving on into a research field. So just kind of laying it all out there, even if you're not necessarily interested, just putting it out there so you can see all of your options. And so once you have that kind of set up for that self-assessment at the academic, career, and personal levels, so you know where your motivations are coming from, then looking further into the types of degree programs specifically for what you want to do, if graduate school is where you want to go. And so the reason why I say that is it may depending on what your overall career goal is. You may just go for a master's, or you may need to go for a doctorate. And so those are some things to consider, that you don't have to go for a doctorate, but depending on if you just stop at a master's, you have to consider what type of master's. So a master's, it's basically the purpose of it is that you're going to be mastery of a specific level of study. It can be anywhere for 1 to 2 years. And then there are research masters as well as professional masters. So with the research masters, there's a heavy emphasis on the coursework as well as the research. And then there's a thesis that you would have to perform to show your proficiency in your field of study. Then at the other level, you have the professional masters, and this is going to be more for assessing practical skills. You're going to be doing a lot of clinical rotations, clinical settings. You'll see this in a lot of the psychology areas. And what I have is a master's of education. And so my journey was a little bit different. So I was already in research, involved in a research lab as an undergrad. So I was already working on a thesis per se, but it didn't go into my master's study where I had to actually present that in a thesis format for my graduation. And so for a master's of education, it was a year-long program. And then at the end of that, I had a intense comprehensive exam where I was presented with questions from my committee. And then I had to show the knowledge and proficiency in the area of exercise science, which I studied, to be approved by the dean as well as the committee members, to show that I was able to move on out into the world. So the other type of degree is a doctorate. And so the purpose of this is conducting original research or becoming a licensed professional in a given field. And so doctorate degrees can be anywhere from 3 to 6+ years. And why there's such a variety is it just depends on your career goals. There's lots of things that happen. Especially now, most graduate programs are pretty flexible and open, knowing that life happens. And some people step away for a year or so, and then they come back, and that's perfectly fine. Where you'll commonly see where people complete it in 3 years is if they have the master's and the PhD kind of merged together. So they would do a year of the master's, and then they would complete their doctorate in 3 years. And so a set track. But it's ultimately something that you'll work with your committee members as well as your chair of your committee to determine what the best path is for you. So the research path of this doctorate, where you have a thesis or dissertation on your own original research, and then the professional version of that would be where you're meeting a certain licensing or accreditation standards towards a chosen field. So again, the first thing that pops in my head is for like clinical psychology. They have to do clinical rounds in order to meet their requirements for that doctorate as well. So we talked about, again, the different types of degrees, and then also you're wanting to reach out to your network. So I mentioned just talking to your friends about your career aspirations, talking to faculty members that you're already taking classes with, as well as your family members, because you don't know who's in their network, maybe not necessarily in yours, that they could point you towards. And then ultimately getting some suggestions based off of those connections of potential other programs to look into and research for. So reaching out to your network specifically, so I listed some questions here, some questions you may ask them. So like, what was your experience in graduate school like? How did it compare to your undergraduate studies? So if you already know graduate students that you can talk to where you're at, just kind of getting a general feel for how they feel about going on to graduate school is a nice way to just get a rundown of how it works. And then what do you enjoy or find most rewarding and challenging about your profession? So having a conversation about not only the benefits, why they personally wanted to go to graduate school, but being realistic about some of the challenges. And then why did you decide that you wanted to pursue a research career? How did you pick your specific topic or field? So just getting an idea of their journey, giving them a chance to share their journey, because then you may hear about area of study that you didn't know was an area of study. And then skills that you may need that are most necessary for success in this profession, and what experiences in their undergrad education that prepared them to go into the field. And then lastly, most importantly, asking if they have any suggestions of anyone that they could point you to or introduce you to, whether it's through email or in person. And so these are just some kind of questions to kind of facilitate conversation in that way, if you need some suggestions when reaching out to your network for examples of places to study. So from that, you take your network, what they've suggested areas, you take your interests, your personal values, your motivations, and then you also take the rankings of the institutions of programs of study, so the research institutions that you're interested in, and ultimately coming up with a list. So how exactly do you come up with that list? So there's going ahead and looking into the list of institutions that you have, looking at their general overall institution webpage, as well as identifying some labs in your research area of interest, and just making a huge list. It doesn't matter how big, how small it is, but just create a list, just all the options you have, and then we'll talk about how to kind of whittle that list down a little bit more. So some things to take into account when you're doing that search, that web search, is looking at the academics. So what is the program's reputation? Do they have any research opportunities? So this is just, quick Google search into these key terms. There's mentoring opportunities. What do their class formats look like? Do they offer some more courses that you're interested in? The length of the program. Do they have a full-time versus a part-time option? And then their average class size. When we're talking about admission things to consider, what are the application deadlines for them? The requirements as far as test scores for the GRE. And now some institutions are dropping the GRE, so that's something to consider as well as their GPA standards. If you'll have to do an interview, because that's kind of variable dependent on the institution, whether you have a formal interview with the graduate school or not, as well as other admission requirements. So other things you'll need to have in place, whether you need a writing portfolio, they should have all that listed on their site, and you can also contact the admissions office as well. If they have the possibility of a wait list, so what is the acceptance rate? If they're also, you want to keep in mind the dynamics of these kind of soft skills of your interaction with these institutions. So if you do take that chance to call them up with a question or to send an email, what's the responsiveness rate of working with those individuals and the friendliness of the admissions staff, because those are people that you're going to interact with frequently through your time in graduate school. And then also considering the cost. So how much does tuition cost for 1 year? What is the total cost for 1 year? And then looking at the total program costs. And so I don't want you to get overwhelmed. I know I put a lot into the cost, but we'll also talk about ways to kind of mitigate that, opportunities for funding, so there's not so much pressure, because I don't want that to deter you. I was lucky enough to have mentors that were very supportive and directed me and helped me find funding. So I ended up not having to pay for my master's or my PhD. So that is possible. And then looking at financial aid availability, as well as when you're applying, there are application fees. And then one of the other things to consider is the cost of living where you would be moving to. So where that institution is located, you want to look at, you know, what are the stipend that they generally give their graduate students if you were to get an assistantship, and can you live off that stipend, or are you also going to have to find other sources of funding? So another way to whittle down that list is looking at how well does it fit with your lifestyle. So it's something as simple as location, you know, are you able to, you know, cold climates versus hot climates. So one of the things that I considered, I applied to a couple different places, some places up north, and I had to consider that, you know, up north, you may have to, I actually, when I had the interview, and one of my questions was, you know, what happens when it snows? And they were fine, they laughed, but they were like, yeah, you may have to dig yourself out to come into work. And so just those kind of practical things to think about if you're not used to living in a different climate. And being okay with, if that's a deal breaker for you, that's okay, because you're going to be there for a while and you want to, you know, enjoy where you're living somewhat. Then also thinking of the time, do you have the time to invest for how long the program may be, as well as what are your your personal life commitments, your work commitments? Are you able to balance those out? That may determine if you look for a part-time versus a full-time appointment in a program. And there are lots of accommodations for that now. It's fairly easy to find an online master's program, and that's just as reputable. So be open to those options because you do need that work-life balance for your values, for your overall health and well-being. And then lastly, so yeah, just looking into if you want to do online or versus on campus to study. So getting to the budget. So another way to kind of whittle this down too is once you've identified some institutions, you also need to be looking into your options for funding. So you can go through FAFSA. So I've included that financial aid website. And so you want to apply to that site sooner rather than later, so you know whether or not you have that funding in place, but including federal loans. But really do your homework there on whether or not these loans are subsidized or unsubsidized. If you have, they have lots of information to kind of break that down as well. There's also private loans, although you need, again, there's pros and cons to each of those. I'm just laying out the options that people have taken, as well as looking into institutional grants that you can apply for. These are all certainly things you can bring up to the admissions office as well as your potential mentor. And then we have scholarships. So there's scholarships that that are available maybe at the institution, as well as organizational scholarships outside of that to support your studies, as well as assistantships. So with assistantships, there are teaching assistantships, there's there's research assistantships and teaching assistantships. So you asking the institution, the admissions office, or your potential faculty mentor, what options are those for there. And if you're doing a teaching assistantship, knowing that you're going to have time to allocate to perform your duties for that job description, as well as you will be held accountable for completing your research duties as well for whatever lab you're working for, if you're depending on what the requirements are. Then we have the work study programs. There's also assistantships through I think there was one where I was at that was through the Office of Diversity Initiatives. So getting creative with departments where there might be some located, and certainly the admissions office, they can direct you to the specific facets of those. Yeah. So if there's overall, looking into keeping these things into consideration. For my personal journey, what I ended up having for my master's, I had a teaching assistantship. And then when I went for my PhD, I was also on a teaching assistantship there. That was something that I had discussed with my mentor ahead of time. And alongside that, I also, they had department scholarships. So each year I would apply for those, and that certainly helped with the cost of books, as well as some of the fees that incurred for graduate school as well. So for the application process itself, when you're filling out and submitting applications, so this is something, a lot of these things you kind of want to do in parallel with each other, but initially when you're looking at these sites to figure out what programs you're interested in, while you're looking at their actual admission requirements, looking at the requirements for the application, making sure you're able to request official transcripts from your undergraduate school, and knowing that that's going to have a cost associated with that, as well as the application processing fee. So you need to create a budget for that, because depending on, I applied to, I think, 4 programs for my master's and 4 programs for my PhD. And it came down to, I just could not afford to apply to I mean, I wanted to apply to a lot, you know, just to see what my options were. But it came down to, you know, I just did not have that money. So keeping what we talked about in line with your selection for schools, and then also being selective for the fact of that it gets costly just applying. So requesting official transcripts, because that's going to have a cost, and it's going to cost you per transcript to institution. Make sure you register for and take the appropriate graduate school exam. So I had to take the GRE, and I gave myself enough time to take it twice. So the first time I was fine for my master's, but I didn't quite have the score that I needed for when I got ready to do my PhD. So I had time to take that test again if I needed to, which I did. Request letters of recommendation from any sort of college professors, mentors, or employers. So anyone who's had some sort of supervising role for you at that time is going to be the most helpful for recommendations. And the earliest, or you want to try and give as much notice as you can ahead of time, so they can write you a very thorough letter of recommendation. About 2 months notice, you can do a month. It just kind of depends on how well you know that person. Sometimes with college professors, or faculty members, it's very helpful if when you are requesting these letters of recommendation that you address them, tell them how, you know, what year you took their class or what semester you took their class, what you liked about their course, and also giving them some specific information that they can go off of. And also you want to be ensure that you have some sort of closer relationship with that faculty member. So that's why it's important to build rapport with your professors while you're taking courses, and not, of course, you want to do what you need to do for the course, but when it comes to writing recommendation letters, faculty members get tons of requests for letters of recommendation, but if they've never really seen your face in their office hours, as far as like seeing the effort in that way, it's really hard for them to write a very personable letter of recommendation, and sometimes they'll just kindly decline just based off of that. So also you want to compile a resume or a CV if required. So making sure you have that, and there should be resources at your institution as far as career development to have someone actually walk you through. Most of those services are generally free, but walk you through your resume or your CV to ensure that it's addressing all of the sections or the type of position that you're wanting at the graduate school, as well as you can send that along to friends, family. There's never enough feedback, so you just want to make sure you send it and get as much feedback as you can to ensure it's competitive as it can be. Sorry, y'all. Lastly, you want to write and edit your personal statement. So sometimes you'll see these and it can get confusing when they're asking for a personal statement or statement of purpose, but personal statement is more about your personal journey. And then the statement of goals, or statement of purpose, they're really looking for your career goals with your personal journey kind of sprinkled in there. And sometimes some institutions ask for both. And you want to compile additional materials if needed. So this may include having a writing sample. So making sure you have one of those on hand and that it's in its best form as well. So we've talked about identifying the program, getting familiar with the application process prior to submission. And now we're going to start talking about actually doing some interviewing with faculty members as well as the admissions office prior to actually applying. So you want to learn about the program and faculty, again, doing a check-in, reviewing your own interests, goals, as well as qualifications, writing potential questions and answers, and conducting ultimately a mock interview, because the more practice you have, the better it's going to be. The more feedback you can get, the better your interview process will go. So when you're learning about the program and faculty, you want to make sure you look at not only the school, you want to look at the institution's mission as well as the institution's vision. You want to look at the mission and vision for the department that you're interested in, and as well as the lab that you're interested in working for. And so all of that, doing an quick internet search to get a background of that, and specifically for the program that you're identifying the degrees and concentration. So knowing specifically what you're trying to apply for when you get ready to talk with admissions as well as other faculty. And then as far as faculty goes, kind of having a little bit of a cheat sheet. So if you do an on-campus interview, you know a little bit about people already, not too much information, but enough to know that you've looked them up, and showing that you have initiative and that you care actually about what they're doing. And so it's at the minimum knowing their position as well as their research focus. And so that way you can kind of initiate a conversation on how your focus and your goals align with theirs and why they need you there. So another way of doing that, so reviewing your own interests, goals, and qualifications, another good way to do that to prepare for the interview process. There's the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And so I've got the personality test, as well as there's another free personality test that you can take, 16 personalities, which is based off of these archetypes. So feel free to check that out. It's really fun. And then this final third link kind of goes over the strengths and weaknesses as far as career-wise for those archetypes. So my personality type would be advocate. And so the strengths of those is that I am very personable, very ambitious, but some of my weaknesses in that I and sensitive to criticism. I just read this actually before I got on. So sensitive to criticism, and then also being a perfectionist. But it doesn't talk about, and weaknesses doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's how do you use those weaknesses and turn them into strengths. And so we'll go over some kind of questions for you to kind of think about and writing out your answers ahead of time. So with that, some of the questions you get going into graduate school are common interview questions if you search those just for general job interviews. So so they'll say, tell me about yourself, or what are your career goals? What are your research interests? But you're going to do great, right? Because you've already considered these things. You've taken all these assessments to self-reflect. They'll say, tell me about a time you failed. What would you consider to be your greatest accomplishment? If we're talking about the admissions office, they would say, why are you interested in this program? Or if you're talking to the faculty member, why are you interested in working in my lab? Knowing what your strengths and weaknesses are. And ultimately, so it's great to talk about yourself, what you want to do, but it also comes down to what are you going to do for the program? What are you going to do for the lab? How are you going to contribute? And so that's one I think a lot of people struggle with. I struggled with myself, but I think it's worth, again, going through these and writing out, self-reflecting and writing out your answers to what these questions would be. And there's lots of examples to answer these questions in what feels authentic to you. And lastly, when you have all of your answers to your questions written out, there's plenty more. Again, you can find a lot of these online. I also, personally, I listen to podcasts, so career prep podcasts, because even if it's not specifically for grad school or research, it still can apply to other things. So when you get ready to conduct a mock interview, first you want to read the questions out loud, just gently. You've got your paper, you've got your questions and answers, read them out loud. You can be by yourself. And then the second step of that would be to practice answers in front of a mirror, so not looking at the paper. And then finally, and you can do this more than once, this is just a brief overview, but finally you can meet with a friend, a peer, coworker, or faculty member, and have them read off the questions and you give your answers. And it's a good activity to do, because they may have some interesting feedback, like, oh, I may just rephrase that a little bit, or they may notice some mannerisms. And so, you want to practice in the way that you're going to be interviewing. So are you doing a online or Skype interview? So you want to maybe have them in another room, or have them do it from their house and you're at your office. And so that way you're practicing where the competition is going to be, right? Or if you're going to be doing an on-campus interview, you want to practice in person. Are you going to be sitting, standing? So all of these little intricacies, but you want to set up, I come from a sports psych lab, so you want to set up, you want to practice how you're going to compete, essentially. And so we want to talk about how to network while navigating the admissions process. So inquire about admissions, contacting potential faculty members who you're going to work with, and then scheduling a personal visit. So inquiring about admissions. So what kind of financial resources are they going to offer? So these are things that you could just ask in a brief meeting or through email. What is the acceptance rate, wait list? Are there application fee waivers? How do you apply for them? And then if they have any assistantships available, and whether those are department concerned or on campus in other areas. And they can also direct you to resources to find those, as well as what is the timeline for acceptance. So you can kind of plan out, especially if you're applying to other institutions as well. Then you also want to contact potential faculty members, because it's going to help with the networking along the way into the graduate school, because it's very helpful if you already have a mentor identified. So emailing them, if you don't have anyone that's introduced through your network, you can certainly send out a cold email, but keep it short and sweet, to the point, your interests, why you want to study with them, what interests them about your lab, or what interests you about their lab, what your career goals are, and how you feel like you would be a good contribution to their lab, as well as people have different views on this, but it just kind of depends. But you can either offer to send your CV or resume, or you can go ahead and attach it for them to view at their convenience. And then hopefully you'll hear back whether or not they're accepting grad students. You can also find this information on their website. So a lot of people will post on their lab if they're looking for new students. And with an initial meeting, where it's usually it'll be over the phone or through Skype, confirm if they're currently accepting students, how are they usually funded, what are their expectations of their mentees, and then discussing your career goals. Again, why you're interested in their lab, what you hope to learn. Here, transparency is key, because if you feel like you can't be yourself, then that's not a place you want to be. At least that's the motto I go by. So then hopefully you'll want to try and schedule a personal visit, an on-campus visit, so you can kind of see where you're going to be. And so that way you'll be meeting with department faculty, department administration, the graduate students, as well as you'll get a tour of the campus and the lab. And then to kind of wrap things up, when you get to that on-campus visit, you want to give you some questions that you could potentially ask current students and PIs. So you'll have questions for grad students, which will usually be centered around the grad school, the lab, and some of the community dynamics, so where you'll be living. And then questions for the PI usually center around the lab and student expectations. So for the grad students, what are your potential PI's expectations from doctoral students? So normally the PI will drop you off with the current grad students and be like, have fun. And then they'll come pick you back up and take you around to other people to interview with in the department. And so what are the important characteristics for a student entering the graduate program? How long does it take people to graduate? What do they think of the graduate program? Asking them about their funding, maybe rephrase, is it enough to live on, but just asking maybe if they had to pull out extra funds. Are they on a teaching assistantship or a research assistantship? And then what is the student community like? Because you also want to have a good dynamic with your mentor. You want to know how that's going to be, but you also want to observe and know about the dynamic with your co-workers, your peers, as well as the city you'll be living in. Then lastly, asking for the PI, what is their mentoring style? And are they expecting you to work on projects that have already been developed? Are you expected to right away create one of your own individually? And then how often are you going to be meeting with them? Lastly, what careers do your students pursue following graduate school? And again, asking them how long does it take students to graduate? So these are all things to kind of keep in mind to determine if you can anticipate a good working relationship with this mentor, with your potential coworkers. And other considerations is after this, even if you don't end up doing a campus visit, you always thank everyone, whether it's administration, other faculty members, people in your network, your current, even after the visit, the current PI, your potential mentor. You always need to send follow-ups. You always need to thank everyone and help others along the way. So while you're going through this, you may know someone else who's going through this, and y'all can help and give feedback for each other through the process, as well as maybe one day you're giving a talk to a new cohort of undergraduate students. And so just pay it forward. And I'll always say this, it's never too late to go to graduate school. And I'll end on a quote of just feel the fear and do it anyway. Believe in yourself. It is possible. All you have to do is just take the chance. And so thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much for that, Dr. Buchanan. Does anyone have any questions for her?
Well, I'm going to chime in. That was a fantastic presentation. I really enjoyed that. And you went into incredible depth. The number of questions, that's something that I think is so helpful, the type of questions that you can ask with each group. So I just wanted to highlight how wonderful that was. And also that it's never too late. I always tell students I took 10 years off between getting my bachelor's and going to graduate school. And it gave me a much deeper appreciation for all the different opportunities in graduate school. And that's another thing I would advise students is that when you do go to graduate school or, a PhD program is embrace the experience and really engage with all the different activities and opportunities that are there. I was amazed as an older student going back how students who had gone straight from bachelor's to a master's program were not going to like every screening that I was going to or every lecture that I was going to, because I was like, oh, I'm paying for this. I've got to get every drop of knowledge out of this experience. And I think that's a valuable thing to think about as well. But that was a wonderful presentation. Does anyone else have any questions or comments?
I have a quick question. So when you were visiting the campuses or like visiting the labs, um, were there any labs you visited where like you got there and you were like, I definitely don't want to be there? And what were the signs you were paying attention to?
That's a really good question. Thank you for that. So I think one of the places that I visited, it mainly I got to the location and realized I don't think I would be happy here. I was happy with everyone. Everyone was really nice, but it honestly came down to the location so it was as simple as the location, and I just realized that it was not the place for me. But some other things that when I went to visit Florida, some of the things that I looked for sure were when I was talking with the grad students, I definitely asked some of those questions, about mentoring style. So I think those are some things to consider. I hope I'm not talking about your question, but I have definitely when I've talked with other people of why they maybe didn't choose another institution, was it usually came down to the location or something they just initially knew. It wasn't anything specifically like negative. It was just a feeling of, okay, great people, nice environment, but not for me. So it's just kind of one of those things where it was just a feeling. I wish I could give you more than that, but it was just a feeling of is not necessarily the best fit. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, and it also makes me ask one other thing. So if a student hasn't participated in a lot of research, or maybe they've only participated in like a certain niche of research, how do they know exactly what kind of mentorship would be best for them? Like if they haven't interacted with a lot of mentors.
Yeah, so I think one of the things is attending seminars like this. It's one of those things you don't know until you know. But hopefully looking through resources of like I know through some of the career podcasts or looking online, they somewhat kind of give a brief overview of mentoring style, but it's just yeah, I would say that's one of those things of you've got some really good questions for me. I think it's just having being able to have the opportunity to attend things like this to kind of develop those skills of and kind of honestly, I hate to say it, but having to be an advocate for yourself and initiating, kind of locating some of the resources to learn about the different mentoring styles. But I would say from a general perspective of overall just looking out for if you get like a kind of offbeat vibe from the situation, then that's probably not a place you want to be. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, excellent questions, Dilu. Any other questions from our audience? All right. Well, I just want to thank Taylor again for Dr. Buchanan for doing an incredible presentation. That really was super informative, and I know we're going to get some hits on our YouTube for that. So thank you so much. I will definitely be pushing students in that direction because you provided them with a lot of information that is very valuable. So thank you for that. And I also want to thank I think we've got both Haley and Keegan here now. I want to thank both of our wonderful merits or grad students who have been helping with this series. And again, just to remind people that we will have our two postponed workshops on scientific literacy and ethics and leadership. In the next 2 weeks, we will post that on our social media, so follow us there, and you can find out about those other 2 workshops. But again, thank you again to Dr. Buchanan and to everyone else who attended and participated. Really appreciate all of that, and look forward to hearing from you soon if you have additional questions. Thanks again.
Yes, thank you.